Hello once again everyone, you're watching CrunchRepublican, and today I want to talk to you about something that is affecting a lot of people in this country right now. Political correctness. And it's starting to personally affect me because I can't stop looking at stories of people who've been personally affected and people who have been silenced because their views just conflict with somebody else's. One of the cornerstones of our society, whether American or global, is the ability to express opinions and ideas to each other in order to grow. When we cease to do this, we limit the growth of society in turn. So I've laid out some points here, which are very, very, very important. And if you're watching this, just please take the time to listen to them, because it's as clear as I could possibly be on this issue. So I want to start off just by reiterating, political correctness has just gotten to the point where all the freedoms that we've been granted under the First Amendment to the Constitution are now under a very serious and grave threat. We've seen what's happened on YouTube. No doubt many people know about it. There's been a lot of conversation, especially amongst my friends and other people I know, that now apparently if you monetize your videos on YouTube and you violate very vague and seemingly simple guidelines, you're stripped of that funding. And that's how a lot of people on YouTube make their life. There are a lot of people who I watch on YouTube who aren't even affiliated with anything politically that are now under threat from this. And I don't know, maybe they'll just go to Patreon, maybe they'll just go to crowdfunding or something. But it all roots, every single issue that I'm about to talk about roots itself in education. And it's the right of the people. Our founding fathers knew this, and they made it explicit that a well-educated populace must be maintained in order to promote a free and prosperous society. And there is an absence of people in this country, at least from the perspective of the United States, of course, that are not properly educating themselves and not taking a look at the issues that face them, their community, their state, their country, and the world they live in. If education continues to ignore individual merit and unceasingly promote what has become known as social justice these days, an increasingly far-left agenda is eventually and inevitably going to undermine every social institution until it has control over the entire federal government. And this is just a fact. If everybody starts being educated to lean left, eventually the entire government will lean left. But now it's not leaning left, of course, it's pretty much falling over left. You hear about all these prestigious universities and other institutions that have been called out time and time again for creating what they call designated free speech zones. Well, the left continues to brag about how just and fair it is to everybody, to all people. It seems ironic in the worst way that they promote and execute their fairness, is what they call it, by segregating zones in which people are allowed to speak freely. This is insane, and people really just need to take a look at the inherent reverse segregation that's happening here. The left claims to be for everybody, but yet now we have to have designated zones on campuses. Only there you're allowed to speak freely. And I just made a point of this, and I'm looking at it right now. Those who do their homework would probably point out to me in rebuttal that the Supreme Court ruled in the case Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District that non-disruptive speech must be upheld only by public schools and not private ones. Well, here's a newsflash. Let me make this very clear to you. No institution, public or private, should be allowed to invoke these kinds of policies. In case you guys haven't heard the news, all of America is a free speech zone. I have a copy of the Constitution right here with me, a pocket Constitution with the Declaration of Independence, and it's pretty clear what our Bill of Rights guarantee us. The Anti-Federalists, who were the ones that were against the ratification of the Constitution, were the ones that argued long and hard to get the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. That wasn't inherent in the original version of the Constitution. If we look back at our history, the Constitutional Convention only convened originally to revise the very flawed Articles of Confederation, which was our first Constitution in the United States. Pretty much our first form of laws and government, I guess. Now, the Anti-Federalists did have some plans that are different to ours today, but the Connecticut Compromise, I believe it was, allowed them to integrate the Constitution to what it is today. So without the presence of the Anti-Federalists, of course, of the Constitutional Convention, and their beliefs, which were heavily rooted in early republicanism, we would not have the Bill of Rights. So we would not have the first 10 amendments. We have very, very important policies within the first 10 amendments, especially, our rights granted within the First Amendment, freedom of speech, press, assembly, petition, all that. Right to bear arms, especially if the government gets too big and they claim to take our guns away from us. And, like the 10th Amendment, which says that anything not in the Constitution is pretty much up to the states or the people. Now, since I talked about the Supreme Court case, I'd also like to point out, and this is an issue that no one's talking about, so I really want to bring this up. I think this is the main part of what I'm trying to say here in terms of law and how the left can really affect the law, like I mentioned. Supreme Court justices are appointed to fairly interpret the laws of the United States and also to clear up any disparities between government at the state and federal levels. If you took a basic government or history class, you know this. Or civics in middle school, I think. The Supreme Court interprets the laws. The judicial branch interprets the laws and clears up, as I said, the disparities between the government in this state governments and the federal government. Now, if the next Supreme Court appointment, because we do have a vacancy in the Supreme Court currently, and any subsequent appointments are handed over to the left, there's going to be an unprecedented bias that's going to take hold over this branch of government that decides what is constitutional. That's what the Supreme Court rules most of the time. What is constitutional? Look at the policies of, selective incorporation, where states had their own laws, and when cases finally went to the Supreme Court, that's when the Supreme Court said to them, okay, now you have to follow what's in the Bill of Rights, what's in the Constitution. Because there are several disparities between state and federal governments. It's a hugely important point. No advocate of free speech that I've seen so far is talking about this, and this needs to be addressed immediately and brought to the attention of the American people, like yesterday. Because if we start appointing liberal Supreme Court justices, if we decide to elect the candidate for the Democratic candidate, she's going to be very careless. I mean, I don't want to get too political in terms of the election, but she is claimed now to not have known at least 35 things about what she's being accused of. And that's dangerous when you have a candidate running for president who claims to not know so much based on a concussion. Listen, if you are not physically, mentally, psychologically, whatever, in a shape to lead this country, or do any basic medial task for that matter, you should not be running for president. And it's up to this person who leads the country to appoint justices to the Supreme Court. And if they're carelessly appointed, they're going to shift the tide of what is constitutional to an extreme point. It could even go to the point where some parts of the First Amendment are revoked. Of course, in subsequent amendments, obviously, but of course this is a worst case scenario, but it is definitely a real thing that could happen. Now, as you notice, I'm talking really calmly, trying to get my point across. But I mean, listen, guys, I can get angry and yell all I want. I can say the left is this, the left is that, but no amount of resorting to my animal instincts is going to get me anywhere. And frankly, the left and the right are clearly divided on this issue when it comes to getting angry and yelling or talking about social issues. So, for example, when people on the left are affected by a social problem, they're going to proceed to find a group to blame it on and subsequently confront it en masse instead of individually. This obviously supports the liberal ideology of collectiveness, where the government or a bigger organization for that matter has more weight and representation than that of the individual. Now, to counter that, when those on the right are affected by a social problem, they usually proceed to ask themselves what they can do to fix that problem, and then they go to other people, or maybe even still within themselves, to work out numerous solutions. This adversely, without any doubt, supports the conservative ideology of individual liberty, wherein the people and the states hold a very significant moral standing over a centralized government. Now, again, that's why I said earlier, referencing history and the Constitutional Convention, and even before that, that anti-federalists were for republicanism, or at least the pioneers of republicanism, because they did not want a big central government telling everybody what to do. They wanted more representation within the states. Of course, it went to some lengths, and that's why it was balanced out by what the Federalists had, and so we have our Constitution. But people on the right are very, very, very much more likely to look at themselves and say, what can I do about this? Whereas people on the left are gonna, usually they go and they blame a group for something, and then they gather together and use collective ideals instead of individual ideals to try to solve their problem. Listen, it's not hard to look at it with an open perspective and see the clear absence of justification for the actions of the far left. Personally, in my experience with people on that side of the political spectrum, they seem to have skipped over very crucial points of development in their childhood, and they've allowed the absence of those experiences to bottle up into crippling anxiety. This is why a lot of conservatives are so much more likely to accept and embrace traditional values, because they've been raised from the ground up and not sporadically. Because of the absence of those very crucial values that a lot on the left are missing out on, they in turn learn to rely on a greater power, for example, the government, to take on some sort of pseudo-parental role to provide for them. When they become offended by the simplest of things, for example, like their microaggressions or whatever they get offended by, they don't know how to handle it because they missed out on those important stages of development that would have otherwise allowed them to overcome whatever offended them in the first place, which is, they're basically neglecting sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's literally just that simple. When you're looking at it from this point of view, looking at it very simply, a lot of these people on the left, because they missed out on those stages of development, will throw a tantrum, as no doubt a lot of you watching this have seen on YouTube, and they'll proceed to use their feelings in place of factual evidence. This is huge. They'll use their feelings over factual evidence in an attempt to calm themselves down, just like a child, because again, they've missed out on those stages of development. They allow it to bottle up, as I said. It's just like a parent when they give a crying baby a pacifier to make the baby stop crying. And so the baby learns to rely on that parent to provide for them. The government, in turn, proceeds to pacify the left by allowing the restriction on the actions that hurt them in the first place, appeasing them. This kind of psychological appeasement needs to end immediately. And any given person, no matter what they feel, where they come from, what their background is, must be held accountable for his or her own actions. Listen, guys, if you feel offended, tell somebody. If somebody says something to you that offends you, just tell them and work it out in a civil manner. Say, hey, listen, that offends me. Be a grown-up about it. If somebody says something to you that seems offensive, say, hey, I didn't like what you said, and work it out. It's not that hard. Just treat people the way you want to be treated. Respect that social contract that you all signed at birth, and give and take credit only where it's due. I can't believe that I have to go on the internet to explain this to people, because a lot of people try to cheat the system, no matter what the system is to them. They don't give credit where credit is due, and they don't take credit where credit is due. People are too tough on themselves. Just respect other people. Let's be open, let's be civil, let's have an open discussion and not try to limit anyone's free speech. There are many, many tolerant liberals who I know that respect the Constitution, that respect people, and allow them to voice their opinions. We need to learn everyone's perspective, no matter where they come from. That is paramount. We need to respect each other. We need to respect each other's opinions. And again, we need to treat each other the way that we want to be treated, and just learn from our history. History teaches us, this is a quote, I forget who said it, but I'm going to leave you guys with this. History teaches us that we do not learn from history. Thanks so much for listening and paying attention to these really important points. Please do share this video. It's very important to me, and it's very important to people like me. We need to get this message across and advocate for free speech as much as possible. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.